for being here. We are so grateful that everyone remained and stayed despite what was happening. For those that are watching online, we appreciate your patience and we apologize that we are late. We had a bit of an emergency here, but we're here and we're ready to get started. We are at Old Westbury and we are just delighted to be here. I want to thank Dr. Sams for allowing us to be in this beautiful space here. We're in the recital hall. And we are on the beautiful campus here at Old Westbury, SUNY Old Westbury. So thank you for allowing us to be here. We are the New York State Community Commission for Reparation Remedies, and I am Charnel Hawkins, and I have the pleasure of serving as chair for this great commission. And thank you all for joining us for today's discussion. Today's hearing aims to gather valuable insights and testimonies on related matters to the Commission, and our work is to find reparation remedies. Especially today, we are proud of this theme on displacement, removal, and land and wealth theft. We have a full agenda with presentations from experts and elected officials, and most importantly, you, members of the public. So thank you for being here. I am honored to sit next to my esteemed commissioners, and we are going to just take a brief moment to introduce ourselves, and then we'll begin with the program for today. But we appreciate everyone's commitment to being here today. We apologize for the late start, but we could not control emergencies, but we are grateful that we are able to be in this beautiful building, and we appreciate everyone's commitment to maintaining a respectful environment that fosters constructive dialogue. And if you wish to speak and sign up for the public hearing, you can please do so outside, sign up, because after the education session, we'll make room for your voice. And so to my right, I would love to introduce this commissioner, allow this commissioner to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laree Daniel Favors, Executive Director at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College.
Yes, she deserves a round of applause. And to my left.
Oh, okay. I'm Dr. Ron Daniels. I'm president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and convener of the National African American Reparations Commission, and also the co-convener of the Global Circle for Reparations and Healing. And if I might, let me just say that it is not only an honor to be here, I would be remiss if I did not in so noting a couple of personages that I think in a celebratory way we ought to note. One of them was one of the great faith leaders and one of the great political leaders of our time, the former president of this university, Reverend Calvin Otis Butts, who was a pastor of Abyssinian Baptist Church and also president for many years of this great university. I've just had the honor of meeting in fact, I was bumping into him when I was trying to get my directions. I didn't realize he was the president, but I just met the president a moment ago. And the other, I would just say, it's important to note the passing of a great educator and a great figure of our time, Dr. Jawanza Kunjufu. I just wanted to say his name as we start the meeting. So thank you very much, Madam Chair, for indulging me.
Absolutely. I want to acknowledge that there are 9 commissioners here. We also have Commissioner Hogues, who is here. He'll join us shortly. I want to acknowledge that the commissioners that are not here, you can find more information about them, but I also want to acknowledge Linda Brown Robinson, one of our commissioners who lost her beloved husband, Van Robinson. You all know his name and you know his work, but you will see his name lit at the New York State Fair, the Pan-African section of the New York State Fair. But he was a great leader, and he just passed away this weekend. And so we just want to take a moment of silence and acknowledge all of the great leaders that we just lost. So we'll just take a 30-second moment of silence. Thank you for that moment.
Ashe.
I would like to pass the mic to our commissioner that just walked in and just give him a moment to introduce himself as we prepare for our elected officials.
Thank you so much. My name is Commissioner Tim Holmes. I am the Commissioner for New York State Department of Civil Service and the President of the New York State Civil Service Commission. Was appointed to this commission by Governor Kathy Hochul, and I'm excited to be here and listen to what the public has to say, both hopefully live and virtual. I don't know if that option is available. I'm excited for the work to be done, and the community is a large part of that work, so thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Commissioner Hogs. We are so grateful that you are here today. I want to acknowledge that we have two staff from the governor's office, and I'm grateful to our great governor, Governor Kathy Hochul, for her leadership and her support of the work of the commission. And so I want to acknowledge Shakira Thames and Joseph Ramirez, and we can just acknowledge them in the room. If you want to bring greetings, you're welcome to bring greetings. Well, thank you for being here. I just want to acknowledge that Ms. Timms has been to all of our meetings, and we are grateful for her support. I also want to acknowledge that we have Executive Director Joshua Joseph, who's in the room with us today, and I know that are you going to bring greetings today? I'm excited that he's going to bring greetings on behalf of our great Assembly member, Szilagyi. She is the fifth-term legislator and a lifelong resident of Elmont. Assemblymember Szilagyi represents the 22nd District on Long Island, including communities of Valley Stream, North Valley Stream, Elmont, South Valley Stream, South Floral Park, the village of Belrose, Belrose Terrace, Woodmere, Stewart Manor, and sections of Franklin Square. For 3 years, she's co-sponsored the bill that legislated the New York State Community Commission on Reparation Remedies, which brings us all here today. And we are so grateful for her leadership, and we're thankful that you are here today to represent our great Assemblywoman. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hawkins, and to the fellow commissioners. Really appreciate your time. My name is Joshua Joseph. I'm representing Assemblymember Mikael Szilagyi. Wonderful bio that the chair just gave. She chairs the Black, Puerto Rican, Hispanic, and Asian Legislative Caucus. And for all the caucus members, this commission, this effort remains paramount. This is not about any one individual. This is not about, not even just about New York State. This is about the collective advancement, economic empowerment of Black New Yorkers and Black Americans. So we really appreciate the mission and the goal here, and we're here to support throughout the process. I do apologize, the chair could not make it. They are still negotiating a budget, which we hope to finalize soon, but she does bring her greetings and hope for a good meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge that, again, we are in this great house of SUNY O. Westbury and want to make room for President Sams if he would like to bring greetings. This is your house, and so we want to give you an opportunity to bring greetings. Please welcome President Sams.
Good late afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, that's kind of hard for you to repeat, right? Good afternoon.
Good late afternoon.
I just want to express our appreciation for your choosing SUNY O. Westbury as a site to have this very important conversation and to bring everyone from across the state to engage in this dialogue. And certainly we know that the nature of the topic and the challenge that it presents for us is one that will take continuous, sustainable, honest dialogue. And certainly no better place in our mind, in this state, than to have such a dialogue than SUNY O. Westbury. I think Dr. Daniels alluded earlier to some of the folks who've graced our university. Dr. Butts, we also talked about Dr. Sharshi McIntyre, and we can go on and on about those who have been on this campus and have woven their brilliance and intellectual pursuits and understandings of the world and commitment to a more just world here at this university, and would truly believe that it is right to have this conversation here at Old Westbury. So thank you for thinking about us. You are welcome anytime, and I am excited to hear the conversation that will ensue. Welcome again.
Thank you. Thank you all for the support of this work. Next, we're going to briefly share a little bit about the commission and our work. And this presentation is going to help you understand about our purpose, our goals, and the work that we've undertaken so far. Sorry, I have the clicker, so I'm in control of things. I didn't know that. Here's our agenda for today. And as you know, again, for those that are just joining, I apologize that we are late. We had a bit of an emergency here, but we're all here. And so we're going to move forward. And so we are the New York State Community Commission for Reparation Remedies. And I am going to just provide you a brief overview. This PowerPoint is available online. But as we begin this presentation, I want to just provide you some quick and important historical context on slavery in New York. Contrary to what many assume, slavery was deeply entrenched in New York State's history. The Dutch first brought enslaved Africans to New Amsterdam, present-day New York City, in 1626. By the early 18th century, New York had become the largest slave-owning colony in the North, while 40% of white households enslaving black people. In 1711, a slave market was established at the foot of Wall Street. Most don't know that. At what is now known as the intersection of Wall and Water Streets. This market remained active for decades, playing a central role in New York City's economy. And these historical facts are crucial to understanding that slavery just wasn't a Southern institution. It was foundational to New York's development. This slide here shows Thomas Nast's famous illustration from Harper's Weekly in 1863, depicting the promise and hopes following the Emancipation Proclamation. The image contrasts the horrors of slavery with aspirational visions of freedom, showing pavement for our work today, public education, and home ownership. These were dreams that the formerly enslaved people held. But we now know this reality, post-emancipation America, had often fell short of these ideas. We want to share that New York State is not the first state to take on this effort, and it's important to note that other states have begun this work. California became the first state to establish a statewide reparations task force in 2020 with their final report that was issued to the California legislature in 2023. And as you can see from this map on the screen, there are 22 localities across New York State, and that number continues to grow. And New York is the second state to take on the statewide effort, and we are proud to be the 9 commissioners named to lead that work. Let me just go back. I want to acknowledge H.R. 40 and New York State Commission's establishment. At the federal level, we have H.R. 40, which would establish a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans. And that was first introduced in 1989 by Representative John Conyers, Jr., and reintroduced in Congress every year without passage. And here in New York, our commission was signed into legislation on December 19th of 2023 by Governor Hochul, and the bill was sponsored, or I should say co-sponsored, by Assemblymember Szilagyi and Senator James Sanders, Jr. And our commission is tasked with examining the legacy of slavery, subsequent discrimination, and their continuing impacts, and developing recommendations for appropriate remedies. Just want to talk a little bit about the pervasiveness of slavery. This slide shows a document from the 1800 census in New York State, illustrating the pervasiveness of slavery even in the northern state. While New York has passed the bill for gradual abolition in 1799, it wasn't fully implemented until 1827. And this census document that you see on the screen documents how New York counted enslaved persons as 3/5 of a person. That was the 3/5 clause that many of you have heard about in the Constitution, which enhanced Southern political power, but also reveals the North complicit nature in the institution of slavery. And then finally, the Community Commission consists of 9 members, and you see most of us on the screen. I think just Dr. Daniels is missing that day, but you were there in spirit. I think you were there online. But here we are, Linda Brown Robinson, Larry Daniel Favors, Esquire, Dr. Ron Daniels, Dr. Derek Hamilton, myself, Dr. Charnel Hawkins, Commissioner Tim Hogues, Jennifer Jones Austin, Esquire, Dr. Deborah Jenkins, and Linda Tarrant Reed. And then our commission staff are on the screen, and we are most grateful for our commission staff, Dr. McKinney Chisholm Straker, Erica Rowe Owen, and Stuart J. Mitchell. I also want to just acknowledge quickly, because I've done most of this, but we have a website, and you can go to the website. If you're watching online, you know that there's a website, but for those in the room, our website is newyork.gov/reparations, and we have an official email, and you can check in with us at any time. If you don't have an opportunity to provide testimony today, you can do so by either calling in or providing your testimony via email. And that number to call in is 518-473-3997. So thank you all for being here. There's several ways that you can get involved. You can attend the meeting or a public hearing. And I just want to highlight quickly the differences between our meetings. We have a business meeting, where these meetings focus on the internal business of the commission, including our internal discussions, our decision-making, our planning, voting on resolutions, and next steps for the commission. For the commission to meet, we have to have a quorum established, and that includes 5 commission members. Today, we do not have that. And so we were just having, and we only plan to have a business meeting, a public hearing. And going forward, we plan to separate the business and public hearings. And so we hope to hear just from you all today. So again, we thank you for being here. And the public hearings, which we're at today, are an opportunity for the community to provide input in their concerns and provide testimony about topics related to reparation remedies. We hope to hear from you today. If you are interested in signing up, you can do so at the front desk. But today's our opportunity to hear from you. Before we begin our public hearing, we'll begin with some education. And that's the way we always highlight. It's an opportunity for the commissioners to learn, and it's an opportunity for the community members to learn. There are many ways that you can get involved. You can get involved by helping us understand what reparations looks like. We want you to come to these meetings with solutions and ideas, policy changes. We certainly appreciate folks that even come with artifacts. If you have artifacts, we'll take pictures of the artifacts. If you have an opportunity to copy, and maybe if you have census documents or documents that you'd like to share, you can share that with the commission as well. But this is an opportunity for you all to be involved and be engaged with the work of the commission. So we'll have public hearings, we'll have business meetings, and you can always sign up to testify. If you can't testify, you'll also have an opportunity to email your testimony to the commission. And we also plan to have, last time we met, we had an issue with those video testimonies, people logging in via Zoom. So we're going to try to do a virtual platform for everyone that's attending to be provide their testimony via virtual method. Just want to acknowledge that we are hiring. There are 2 positions that we're hiring right now for legal counsel team. Is that still open? I think that is actually, and then the economist team. So you can check our website at ny.gov/reparation to learn more. And also want to acknowledge that we have an executive committee, and our executive committee exists with the support of 4 leaders, and I'm grateful to them all. I have the honor, as I said earlier, of serving as the chair. We have the vice chair, who's not here with us today, Dr. Deborah Jenkins. Linda Tarrant Reed serves as secretary, and Jennifer Jones Austin Esquire serves as treasurer, and that is our executive committee, and we're committed to this process in providing transparency and also evidence-based process that centers around community voices and experiences. So we thank you all again for being here. I am pleased to introduce our first speaker, and I'm excited about this speaker, and she's our main presenter, Bria Baker. And Ms. Baker is a writer. She is an activist, and whose book, Rooted. If you haven't read Rooted, go to her website and get the book. The American legacy of land theft and modern movement for Black land ownership. Her book was recently published. Rooted details her family's experiences across the South and makes another case for reparations to include land distribution. Her work has been celebrated throughout multiple media opportunities, and if you haven't had a chance to check her out, you can check her out online. She's been on The Breakfast Club, she's been featured in Harper's Bazaar, New York Times, all over, but she is an incredible leader. She has a BA in political science from Yale University, and Ms. Baker believes deeply in political imagination and the need for nuanced storytelling. She's a collective member of BLISS, as well as the Highland Project, and serves on the board of the Gathering for Justice in Black Farmers Market in North Carolina. Please join me in welcoming our presenter for the day, this evening, Bria Baker.
My name is Bria Baker. I am a 6th-generation Black landowner, a longtime Long Island resident, proud Freeport High School graduate, and, as was mentioned, the author of Rooted, The American Legacy of Land Theft and the Modern Movement for Black Land Ownership. We can go to the slides, and I'll keep talking as we do so. I was inspired to write Rooted because of my family's experiences with Black land ownership and how that intergenerational love and thirst for economic autonomy was passed down from my great-great-great-grandfather, Lewis Baker, and how more of that story ended with my grandparents, Alfred and Janelle. My great-great-great-grandfather, Lewis, bought land in North Carolina just 7 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, and he passed that land on to his 2 sons. And you can go to the next slide. The story of Black land ownership in my family is an intergenerational one, full of love. The land that was passed on to his sons became a 600-acre farm, but also was deeded to create one of the first Black schools for the county of Warren County in North Carolina. That land was then passed on to their children and their children and their children. And again, I am the 6th generation to benefit from it. Next slide. While love was my impetus for writing and researching Rooted, I was also drawn to Black people's resilience in the face of unspeakable violence and loss. We know that the legacy of slavery lives on in our economic and political systems, but I want to spend some time on all of the continued injustices from the 20th century onward. Next slide. In Rooted, I share how Black land ownership peaked in the 1910s, but various racist tactics, including mob violence, land theft, eminent domain, heirs property laws, and many, many more, throughout the 20th century decimated those equity gains. White supremacists burned Black towns, harassed Black leaders, and stole the land our ancestors were forced to leave behind during the Great Migration. While my book centers around the American South, I don't let the North off the hook. As I said, I'm a New York resident. Long before the Great Migration, Black Americans called New York home and were subject to racism and dispossession right here. Next slide. One of the earliest examples is Seneca Village, which we now call Central Park. Seneca Village is the earliest recorded and most prominent 19th century example of Black property owners in Manhattan. That's the 1800s. The community grew thanks to the AME Church and its Black members who purchased parcels to be near and in community with one another. Black people owned more than half of the homes in this neighborhood of Seneca Village, alongside Indigenous, Irish, and German neighbors between what is now 81st and 89th Street. Unfortunately, racist media paved the way for eminent domain to be used to destroy this community. 1,600 people were displaced, with homeowners being offered meager compensation in exchange, and Seneca Village was no more. Now only a small plaque in the massive park bears the name. That's only one example. During and after the Great Migration, disenfranchised Black people were pushed north, making New York a prime destination for Black domestic refugees. Next slide. They brought with them their economic angst and attempted to start anew. Some found success, and many found similar systematic violence at play right here. Eminent domain continued to be used against Black homeowners, especially during and following the civil rights movement, through urban renewal programs that were unleashed to punish Black people. Formally, these programs were designed to help cities combat quote-unquote blight via large-scale slum clearance, but middle-class and working-class Black communities around the nation and throughout the state of New York were demolished and cleared to make way for developers. Next slide. During this time, New York State's white population ranged from about 60 to 88%, New York State's white population, yes, ranged from 60 to 88%, while Black residents were only 40% of those displaced through urban renewal. Black and brown communities bore the brunt as they were pushed out of communities they'd helped to build. The University of Richmond's Digital Scholarship Lab investigated this phenomenon in what became known as their rewriting inequality. That's the screenshots you see displayed here. And I'm going to share what some of those findings express. In Harlem, 2,100 families were displaced through urban renewal laws. All of them were Black people of color. In North Harlem, 1,100 families were displaced. All were Black or people of color. On Long Island, where I'm from, 229 families were displaced from Rockville Center, not far from where you all are. 85% of those families were Black or people of color. 177 families were displaced from Long Beach. 62% of those families were Black or families of color. This is not to say that no white families were affected, but by and large and disproportionately, Black people bore the burden just under a century out from being seen as property themselves in the eye of the law. Even when we attempted to pick ourselves up by our own bootstraps, something we should never have had to do, they were cut out from under us, leaving us barefoot and destitute. Next slide. Where has this history left us? Numbers don't lie. According to the Brookings Institute, there is a $10 trillion racial wealth gap, and the 400 richest American billionaires, who are mostly white men, have more total wealth than all 10 million Black American households combined. Yes, that includes your favorite Black celebrities. A 2019 Federal Reserve survey found that while the average white family's median wealth was nearly $1 million, the average Black family's wealth sits at just under $150,000. The American Bar Association found that $326 billion is one of the more conservative estimates of Black land loss in particular, noting that they don't include other potential benefits of Black land ownership in their estimate, such as the ability for landowners to have control over their labor, more access to capital for investing in other business ventures, the resources to provide access to high-quality education for their children, and the ability to leverage property as capital. What does all of that mean? To put it plainly, Black America has been stripped of our hard-earned wealth. This problem, rooted in white supremacy, was not created overnight, and we'd be foolish to underestimate what we're up against by hoping that it will fade away over time. We need reparations. Next slide. And I actually went through a few of these stats already, so we can all go to the next slide again. Thank you so much. When I say we need reparations, I'm not talking about some pie in the sky theory that has never been tested. Reparations is an international framework that creates a path for truth and reconciliation in the face of crimes against humanity. Germany, South Africa, and Rwanda have all engaged in processes of acknowledging a problem and implementing a range of initiatives to do so meaningfully. That is included, but not limited to, establishing museums and monuments for victims, individual accountability for those who profited from inequity most, and legislation to prevent it from happening again. In America, reparations for chattel slavery and the Jim Crow violence can look like public education for all Americans, institutional investments such as baby bonds, cash payments, and land grants. Money has been siphoned out of Black America, as is displayed in this picture. We need a transfusion to account for and repair that loss. Next slide. In New York, in particular, we can do so much more than plaques, platitude, and paltry promises. We can invest in racially specific guaranteed income pilots, eminent domain reversals, land trusts and banks, tax exemptions for Black property owners impacted by redlining and urban renewal programs, and so much more. Whatever our investment is, we must champion solutions that build wealth and move appreciating assets into the hands of Black New Yorkers. This is why I am a huge proponent of land being a part of that conversation. What we can't afford to do is to accept the status quo and hope that this problem goes away on its own. Thank you so much to the commissioners for hosting these conversations. Thank you for leading the nation and hearing our voices. Let's not let another several decades go by before we do something about this. We need reparations, and we need it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Thank you for being here with us today. Ms. Baker, if you don't mind staying on, we just, if you can leave it on that screen right there, we just have a few questions. I want to take a moment to give the commissioners an opportunity to ask you questions.
Absolutely.
This is Commissioner Hogues. Once again, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to present the information and educate us on some of the things that took place here in New York. A couple quick questions is, so you mentioned the displacement of a bunch of Black and brown folks. Do you know what that land was used for right at that time after those individuals were being displaced?
Through the urban renewal laws, that portion?
Yes, sorry.
Yes. Okay. So there's a range of things that the land was used for. By and large, though, in communities like Harlem and North Harlem, a lot of that land did end up in the hands of private developers. There are loopholes to eminent domain that says that as long as a certain percentage of the land is being denoted and delineated for affordable housing, it can be taken from private property owners and given to private developers for the building of condominiums and apartment buildings. A lot of land is also used to create highways, parks, as we saw with the transformation of Seneca Village into Central Park, and other forms of like transportation, so rail lines, et cetera. So there's no one concrete answer, but they certainly were not transitioned into safe, clean housing for the Black families who were pushed out of them. Those families were often turned into renters in other parts of the city. They were pushed into already overcrowded housing projects. And many of those families who had a legacy of property ownership were pushed into and below the poverty line.
Wow, thank you. And do we know if those individuals were compensated at all for their property, or were they pushed out, or compensated properly, or?
Right. See, you framed that question perfectly, because there is a difference between compensation and proper compensation. And so technically by law, anyone pushed out through eminent domain has to receive some sort of compensation. A lot of the records that were recorded through the University of Rochester, the University of Richmond's Rewriting Inequality Project described that they did not receive the market value of their property. We see this happening still to this day, where Black homes are appraised far below what their actual value is, even though they are paying a disproportionate tax burden. This still happens, and there are class action cases happening all over the country, where a Black family will put their home on the market, receive one appraisal value. They'll remove all photos of Black people, all paintings that feel too African American in culture from the home, and have it reappraised, and it will be valued at nearly $100,000 or more above the initial appraisal value. So sometimes these racist appraisals are used to give people compensation far below what they deserve, and what they do receive is not enough to buy a new home in the areas where they once lived. So they're being priced out of these neighborhoods and pushed to the outskirts of the cities, and away from the jobs that they hold as well, which leads to even more precarity.
Wow. And the last thing, it's somewhat of a thought, not necessarily a question. I was just talking to a young man that is in real estate, and he was telling me how in New York State there's a gap between, we have a lack of black appraisers. And so when you look at going into communities, sometimes individuals just drive by the outside of the house and just give it an appraisal value. And so we are still, we're still losing because of that. And I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that is linked to that, and the ability for us to successfully get individuals into that business to be able to accurately appraise the properties throughout our communities. But thank you so much, and hopefully this presentation could be made available somehow through our website.
Absolutely. I would love to do so. I'll make sure that the PDF gets in, and I don't know if this is being recorded, but I will absolutely work with you and the rest of the commissioners to make sure it can be available.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. This is Commissioner Daniel Favors. First, thank you so much for your presentation. It was extraordinarily helpful. And I'm wondering if you could talk with us a bit more about the eminent domain reversals.
Yes.
I'm particularly interested in what that would look like, considering the tax basis of those properties. The tax burden that would accompany those properties would be at the value that they have currently achieved. I'm wondering if
Yeah.
you've given any thought, and if you can walk us through a concept of local eminent domain reversals that allow for a tax burden either to be non-existent because of the nature under which the land was initially stolen, or for that tax burden to be commensurate with the value of the land prior to the racially motivated theft.
This is such a really thoughtful question. Thank you so much for framing it in that way. I want to use an example from California. It was mentioned that California was the first state to have a reparations task force, and California is also one of the first places where there was a very popular and public eminent domain reversal. And I think it tells a cautionary tale of exactly what you just mentioned as far as the tax burden. So in the 1920s or 1930s, a couple by the last name of the Bruces had a beachfront property, and they had built a resort and hotel on that property that they operated called Bruce's Beach. That business was only in operation for a few years before the County of Los Angeles seized the property through eminent domain, claiming that the property needed to be used for a series of different needs, including a park. The property was seized from the family. They received pennies on the dollar of what they should have gotten for that prime beachfront real estate. And the property was not used for what it was intended to be. The property sat for for over 70 years, nearly a century, until 2020, when Kavan Ward, a local activist in California, launched a petition and campaign for the descendants of the Bruces, who had then passed away, to receive their land back. There was a tiny plaque in one part of the land that honored that the land was once the Bruces, but the rest of the land had sat pretty much vacant. And so that petition was successful. The land was returned to the Bruces. It was valued at $20 million worth of land, and the tax burden for that land fell on the descendants of the Bruces. Now, if the Bruces had been allowed to keep their property and their business in operation, they might have been heirs in the same way that we think of the Waldorfs or the Hiltons. They might have had quite a lot of money to be able to afford taxes on a $20 million piece of property. But their descendants were working class. They had that property stripped from them, and they had to make a living in other ways. And so when that land was returned to them, people rejoiced, but they sort of fell asleep at the wheel and thought that the problem had fully been solved. The descendants of the Bruces could not afford the taxes on the $20 million property, and were forced to sell the land that they had just received through an eminent domain reversal back to the County of Los Angeles. Now, this is still a half win, because selling the land to Los Angeles County is very different from having the land seized. And they were able to take that money and do other things with it, buy property that they could afford, and build trusts and whatever it is that they wanted to do with their family. But it's not the same as if they had had the property in their hand for decades and decades, and if they'd been able to run a business. And so I think it behooves local governments who are considering eminent domain reversals to also consider either grants for the loss of the property value, because what they had taken from them was a piece of beachfront property with a building on it that was a thriving business. What they received back was raw acreage that was zoned very differently from the land that they had before, had to be used in very specific ways. They couldn't even use it they couldn't put like a bunch of houses on it, take out a loan and sell those houses in partitions. It was zoned in a very particular way. I think that they should have received a grant that they did not need to pay back. Aligned with the loss of the property value that was sitting on the land, and that they should have gotten some sort of tax abatement or exemption for a period, let's say a 5 to 10 year period, to allow the family to get on their feet, allow the land to be profitable again, and then allow them to be able to afford the taxes. So I think it is definitely worth considering that when eminent domain reversals are instituted, we can't take families that have been pushed below the poverty line, give them a lot of property that they can't afford to maintain, that will end up back in the hands of private property developers within a few years' time. We need to make sure that it is sustainable for these families to get their land, especially when that land had homes or businesses on it. If it's not being returned with homes and businesses on it, the value of those homes and businesses should be offered in some way so that the families can make do with the new zoning laws and things of that sort, which in New York are very, which are very stringent as well. How high you can build a building, whether it's commercial or residential, industrial, et cetera. Families deserve to have options, and raw acreage alone is not options for families who have had a lot of wealth taken from them.
Thank you so much for that extraordinarily thoughtful answer. I wonder if you could also, the racially specific guaranteed income. I can envision how that would work in a reality where we did not have an explicit embrace of white Christian nationalist policies at the federal level that are currently being used and weaponized against any semblance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. My prediction would be something like this might fall under a category that might will incur some pushback. Can you walk us through your understanding of how a scheme of this sort, I think scheme might actually be an inappropriate word, how a proposal of this sort might be manifested in light of the current reality in which we find ourselves?
And before you go,
Absolutely,
I'm sorry,
yes.
before you go, if we can bring it back to that last screen of the
Yes.
recommendations.
Your green slide, Ms. Baker, can we get that slide
I
back?
don't know
There we
who's
go.
controlling. Okay.
Yeah.
There
Okay,
we are.
thank you so much.
If we can get that full screen, we
Yep, thank you.
appreciate that.
Yes. Okay. Another really great question. So prior to this latest presidential administration taking power and leaning into anti-diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, racially specific guaranteed income pilots have been happening all over the country. As a result of the last 100 days, I know that that is becoming increasingly more difficult to do. And I would encourage hyper local projects to have income requirements, because you can target a specific community that has been affected greatly by redlining or eminent domain that will be a predominantly Black community, and focus on those who are most marginalized and most economically disenfranchised within that community. For example, I have seen some Southern guaranteed income pilots be pivoted to focus on first generation or and using language such as that, which is an economic marker and not a racial marker. I think if we're focusing on communities in Harlem, I'll give an example actually, to use another California example, because our neighbors in the West are really innovating in beautiful ways. There are a lot of guaranteed income pilots that focus on single mothers, and they will focus on single mothers living below a certain income threshold, and make sure that those mothers have access to the guaranteed income pilots first. Those mothers are often given, and through guaranteed income, it's as it sounds, it's a no strings attached amount that they are given on a monthly basis. They do not need to report. It is not like food stamps where it can only be used at a certain amount of spaces. That money can be used in a number of ways. One of the organizations that leads similar pilots is called Economic Security Project. I've done a little bit of work with them on the communication side, and I can tell you that the results are phenomenal coming out of these pilots. The ones that prioritize single mothers often give the mothers $1,000 to $2,000 per month to use for whatever they would like to use. No one is reporting, no one is asking for receipts on what they're using it for, but they are asking questions on how their quality of life has shifted, how their stress levels have shifted, the health of their children, how that has shifted. And so some of these mothers say they are continuing to live off of the income that they make. They continue to work and they're using this money to save so they can have down payment money towards a home that they might not be able to afford otherwise if they were living paycheck to paycheck. Other mothers describe that they're able to get their children into better school districts and into better housing with this money. Other mothers say that they're able to take on less work so they don't have to work 2 and 3 jobs, but maybe they can work just 1 or 2 jobs. And so these programs at the surface are really economically driven. But when you look at the racial demographics of who the single mothers are within the neighborhoods that they are targeting and living beneath a certain income threshold, those mothers in these areas tend to be Black and Pacific Islander in California. Now, if we're thinking of New York and we focus on communities like, let's say, East New York or Hempstead or parts of Harlem or similar neighborhoods like in upstate New York, like in the outskirts of Buffalo and Syracuse and similar areas where you do find a high concentration of Black people living beneath the poverty line who are not property owners, there will likely be a correlation that those people have been impacted in some way by some of the things that I mentioned before, like redlining, land theft, great migration violence, slavery, and the vestiges of it. So I think that is one way to get around it in the meantime. But I do think long term, we need to get people in office who allow us to say Black with our heads held high and to not be afraid of targeting Black communities because we are trying to right a very specific historic wrong. Guaranteed income has been championed as far back as Dr. Martin Luther King prior to his assassination. And he really believed that this was an answer to both racial and economic injustice. And I think in that same vein, we need to champion guaranteed income as a solution to racial wealth gaps or a partial solution to racial wealth gaps. But in the meantime, I think if we are hyper local in our focus, we can find out which neighborhoods in our cities and in our counties have large populations of Black people who are impacted by these things, focus on those who live below the poverty line or below a certain economic threshold, and then use that language and those markers to find the target audiences for these guaranteed income proposals when we can't use race as that marker.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for Ms. Bria Baker for the outstanding work that you have done and are doing.
Thank you.
Very informative. And first of all, on the question of universal income, I'm familiar with the project that you mentioned, the security project that you
Economic
mentioned.
security, yes.
And I appreciate you referencing Dr. Martin Luther King. I started to do that, but I wouldn't. But the reason I say that is because there are a lot of people, a lot of these projects do that, but they do not tie it back to Dr. King because a lot of people are not aware that at the time of his assassination, King was moving not only for the Poor People's March, but the aim of that was indeed to adopt an economic Bill of Rights. A centerpiece of that economic Bill of Rights was guaranteed annual income. Having said that, I think we in the commission are also doing some work around definitions and whatever. And I think really the idea of a guaranteed annual income is more, in my mind, associated with what I would call ordinary public policy. There are things we need to do anyway. And I think, I know that Mayor Ras J. Baraka, for example, in Newark is doing it. He is very close to, I forget the brother's name, out in California who had great
Michael
success
Tubbs.
with it. Yes, it's a very, very successful program. A way of doing it, it seems to me, is if a community that has been has indeed been harmed as a community, if they in fact propose that they receive a guaranteed annual income, it seems to me that would be the way to deal with it. because I think the other thing that's very impressive about what you said, and I mean, let me just be sure, I heard you say there is a registry, or you have developed a registry, or there are registries of like Seneca village descendants, as well as some of the people who were displaced by eminent domain.
Yes,
The
sir.
reason why
There
that's
are.
important is that it will be important for us to develop a harm report. And to the degree that it's specific in that regard, it helps to insulate around the issue of race to some degree, because it is specific to those persons who were specifically harmed and their descendants. So that's an incredibly important point, and I just wanted to lift that up, and I thank you so much for that. Next, I wanted to just focus on this issue of land trust, because I think it's also important to say to ourselves, but to our community, that there are direct benefits that might go to individuals, but we can also talk about what kind of community benefits do we seek that impact our entire community. And I know in the National African American Reparations Commission's 10-point program, we focus on the land question. And at the federal level, we note that the federal government owns millions and millions of public land all across the country, and we suggest that some of that land ought to be allocated in the same way that indigenous people who have yet to really achieve full repair are able to have quasi-sovereignty over it. So I would fantasize about whether or not in the state of New York, I don't know the answer, whether or not the state of New York actually owns land. And if so, it seems to me that would be a source potentially for a claim to be filed. And I think the final thing I wanted to say is I'm also very interested in the eminent domain reversal, and very familiar with the case that you cited, and I think that is something we can approach as well. So I just want to thank you so much for this incredible scholarship, because that scholarship and the particularity of it is what is going to help us develop the claim and to make our case.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Daniels. Thank you. And just one thing that I wanted to add to that is, as you mentioned, with guaranteed income and universal income, it will eventually develop into something that benefits the average American. Right now, Alaska has their version of a guaranteed income because they tax the oil industry there and other industries there, and give the dividends of that money to their citizens. So ultimately, I think what we're asking for is that the wealth of this country be distributed to those who built it. And first and foremost, then, when we're talking about distributing wealth to those who built it, we must be talking about Black Americans. Eventually, that can go on to taxing AI companies and making sure that jobs that are automated away, that other citizens are getting the benefit of it, or the green economy and solar. And there's so many paths towards it. But I do believe that there's a way to begin with Black Americans. The same is true for land trusts. You know, there are conservationist groups that have land trusts and land banks all over the country in the name of climate justice. And I think, and I'd argue that Black Americans can and should be stewards of that land. As you mentioned, the U.S. government, including in New York State, holds so much land that is essentially vacant. That land is massive. I mean, in Georgia, you know, an old military base was reappropriated by Tyler Perry to make a large film studio. There are vacant military bases all around the country that are not being used, with enough land to house and feed and provide community for so many people. And so we should absolutely be looking to some of those places and saying that yes, we do need public parks. Yes, we do need national parks. Yes, we do need green spaces. But there's a lot of land that's not being used strategically. And while that's happening, you have Black people forced into cramped housing in the corners of Brooklyn and Queens and Harlem and Nassau County, Long Island. And it doesn't need to be that way. There's so much land to go around. And I absolutely am a proponent of looking to those spaces and saying, how can we redistribute it amongst both Black and Indigenous nations? So I very much agree with that. And I'm excited to work with you all continuously on keeping track of those harms and also keeping track of some of that vacant land, so that I think sometimes when I talk about land redistribution, people are like, well, you're going to push people out of their homes and put Black people in them. I'm like, no, I'm going to push the grass out of the way and put some homes there. There's so much vacant land, and we don't need to push anyone out of their homes the way that Black people have been pushed out of ours. We can make space on the land that has been God-given. So thank you again for that important question and comment. And I'm excited of the work that the commissioners are doing in making sure people understand we can have a wider imagination. There's so much land that so many people are not thinking about, especially in upstate New York. There's so much land to go around, and we don't need to think that we are confined to only what's on Manhattan and Long Island.
Absolutely. And we are, Ms. Baker, we can talk to you for hours. Unfortunately, we are behind because we had an emergency. We had the fire department here.
Yes.
Luckily, there was no fire, but there was a malfunction, so we're behind. But if you can hang around, we'll come back and let us know if we can come back and ask you questions. But right now, we do have another presentation, but we are grateful for you. We would even love to have just an education session along with the commissioners, because your green slide just gives an opportunity for us to have extended conversation. So thank you for the work that you're doing, Ms. Baker. Let's give her a well-deserved round of applause. We are grateful for you being here today, and so thank you. I want to make room for our next speaker, Dr. Calvin Schermerhorn, and I want to thank you for being patient, Dr. Schermerhorn, as we prepare for you. I know that you have a time crunch, so we're going to make room, and I want to acknowledge that Dr. Schermerhorn, he grew up in Southern Maryland. He earned a degree from Harvard Divinity School and University of Virginia. He's a historian of slavery, capitalism, and African-American inequality, teaching courses in the 19th century American history and advising honors, masters, and PhD students. Dr. Schermerhorn was a Fulbright Scholar to the University of Nottingham in 2022. His work has been featured in The Atlantic, The Daily Beast, The Time, The Washington Post, and other popular venues and media formats. He has significantly contributed to national discussions on racial inequity. He is the author of 4 books on American slavery and inequality, including his forthcoming book, The Plunder of Black America: How the Racial Gap Was Made, which will be published by Yale University Press this year. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Calvin Schermerhorn. Thank you, Dr. Schermerhorn, for your patience. I think, Dr. Schermerhorn, you may be muted, so hopefully our tech team can get you.
Thank
There
you,
we go.
Dr.
We can hear
Hockey.
you.
And thank you, Dr. Jenkins, as well, for inviting me. It's an honor to be with you. Today, I'd like to take a historical look at the specific harms done to Black New Yorkers since the early days of the English colony. This historical perspective stands on the shoulders of research in stratification economics by scholars like Dr. Elora Derenoncourt, Dr. William A. Sandy Darity, Dr. Kirsten Mullen, and Dr. Derek Hamilton, among many others. This is a history of dispossession, disinheritance, and decapitalization. It's a history of what Frederick Douglass called plunder. And I'd like to suggest we look at it in 3 stages, of dispossession in the colonial era, of disinheritance in the early United States, and decapitalization in the last 160 years. So as Dr. Hawkins mentioned, New York City was a center of Black life. Colonial New York was a center of enslavement. By 1700, there are about 2,100 enslaved New Yorkers in the city, and about 4,000 to 5,000 in the colony. And that was more than South Carolina at the time. And slide, please. And so the statistic on the slide has been mentioned, but I'd like to take a little case study and to see how this worked, right? How did slavery dispossess people? So I want to talk a little bit about Venture Smith. Venture Smith was enslaved on Fisher's Island, New York. He was born in what is today northern Cameroon, was captured, sold to American slavers in what is today Ghana, sold to a Rhode Island mariner. In about 1739, he became property of George Mumford, who enslaved him on Fisher's Island for nearly 20 years. Now, if Venture were the average worker, that enslaver, George Mumford, stole about 18 pounds sterling from him in real income value, above the food and shelter and other retained earnings, compared to a free mid-Atlantic earner. By that measure, Venture generated about 180 pounds sterling in profits to George Mumford from the time he turned 16 to the time he left the island. That's between $48,000 and $720,000 today, depending on how you measure it, whether it's income or whether it's using a commodity value. But however you measure it, it's still theft. And so multiply that kind of theft by the number of enslaved people in New York, and you start to get a picture of the magnitude of that process. In 1712, the New York legislature decreed that, in quotes, no Negro, Indian, or mulatto shall hereafter be made free, shall enjoy, hold, or possess any houses, lands, tenements, or hereditaments, that is, inheritance, within this colony. Any such land, its decrees shall escheat or become the property of the crown. Nevertheless, Venture bought land on Long Island from Shinnecock owners. Venture's wife Meg and their daughter Hannah may have moved there temporarily, but the sojourn on Long Island ended after, in his words, an act was passed by the selectmen of that place that all Negroes residing there should be expelled. So the colony is saying that formerly enslaved people can't own land, and local officials are kicking black people out, and so local black codes were punitive reactions to black upward mobility. And white Long Islanders would impose punishing restrictions on African-descended residents for centuries to come. So here's a pattern that's formed in the colonial era. Each time black New Yorkers built a little bit of wealth, the leaders stood there ready to strip that wealth from them. Slide, please. So by the American Revolution, there are about 21,000 enslaved people in New York, representing 10 to 15% of New York City's population. The British occupied New York for much of the war, but the Treaty of Paris required that fugitives from enslavement should be returned to patriot owners, people like George Washington or Robert R. Livingston, New York's chancellor and co-author of the Declaration of Independence. Next slide, please. So independence didn't mean freedom or opportunity. Most African Americans were enslaved, and instead of inheriting their parents' wealth, they inherited an unpayable debt of enslavement. So that means they were disinherited from the promise of freedom. And slide, please. So here's an example of how that worked. In 1799, as Dr. Hawkins mentioned, New York State passed a gradual abolition law, which freed the children of enslaved mothers born after July 4th, 1799, males at 28, females at 25. But notice what the fine print did. It kept black New Yorkers enslaved through many of their most productive years. One of them was Sojourner Truth. She was born in Ulster County in 1797. Growing up, she endured physical, sexual violence, fled with her daughter in 1826. Kidnappers took her 5-year-old son Peter to Alabama, enslaved him there, and she sued to bring him back. So think about imagine having to worry about kidnappers stealing your kid just because he's black, right? So this is the reality that Sojourner Truth faced. Next slide, please. And so early national New York became a place of interlocking disadvantages for black people. In the early 1800s, most businesses and professions were closed to black aspirants. So even when Peter came back, he could not dream of being a lawyer. He could not dream of being a doctor. Most African Americans worked in high-stressed, low-paying jobs: manual laborers, carters, teamsters, mariners, servants, and service jobs like barbers. There were tradesmen and carpenters, but that pooling down at the lower ends of the income ladder stressed people. It had a toll on health, as well as income and wealth. And black women were on the lowest rungs, working as domestic servants, laundresses, needleworkers, or vendors. Even in the U.S., even those artisans actually felt a lot of pressure in the early republic as more and more manufactured goods pushed them to the margins. There are very few schools in New York for African American students. State jobs didn't go to black New Yorkers until the 1850s, and even those tended to be menial jobs. The first recorded black office holder, Edward A. Johnson, wasn't elected until 1917 to the New York legislature. And New York excluded most black people from political participation too. In 1821, New York's Constitution excluded black men from voting who didn't have $250 worth of property. That's a little over $7,000 today. By consequence, most black men couldn't hold office, but at the same stroke, New York eliminated that for whites. So you'd have German or Irish immigrants step off the ship, and once they meet the residency requirement, no matter how poor they are, they can vote, they can hold office. So in 1826, only 16 black voters were registered in New York City. And New York overwhelmingly reaffirmed that in 1846. The next slide, please. So New York abolished slavery in 1827. Anti-black racism followed slavery's development, but it did not unfollow its decline. And as Dr. Hawkins mentioned, New York City became wedded to the South. Whether in Wall Street, shipping, or finance, it was deeply implicated in the Cotton South. The bulk of the nation's cotton exports went through New York City, either physically or financially or both. And the city became a kidnapping ground once again for African Americans, abetted now by city and state officials. Blackness made a person enslavable. Solomon Northup of Saratoga Springs discovered that in 1841. He was lured to Washington, D.C. with a promise of a job, kidnapped into 12 years of brutal slavery in Louisiana. He was one of the few who lived to write about it. And so African-American New Yorkers faced widespread discrimination. James McCune Smith, New York's first licensed black doctor, had to earn his medical degree at the University of Edinburgh. Columbia University didn't admit a black medical student until 1940. That was Travis Johnson. New York's first black lawyer didn't practice in the state until the Civil War era. Cornell's first black law grad, George Washington Fields, class of 1890, wrote his thesis on the jury system, where he decided it was better to dispense with the jury trial altogether and let judges decide court cases. Did pervasive racism have anything to do with his not trusting a jury of his peers? Next slide, please. So at this point, you might stop me and say, well, wasn't the Empire State a haven for abolitionism? Yes, right? We think Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, James McCune Smith, David Ruggles, Sojourner Truth, Harriet Tubman, and of course, Frederick Douglass, right? New York was not Virginia, it was not South Carolina. But that doesn't extinguish or excuse or alibi the specific state-sponsored harms that racism did to black New Yorkers. Think about those specific and interlocking harms of a lack of education, lack of opportunity, lack of income or wealth, lack of upward mobility. So at this time, the New York City was the South's banker and shipping merchant. When we see the concentration of wealth and power that joined Wall Street to the South and to the policymaking apparatus in Washington, D.C., we can see that push and pull. And this is going to be a recurring theme in New York history. Next slide, please. So on the eve of the Civil War, the national racial wealth gap was 56-1, meaning that the average black household had about 2 cents on the dollar compared to their white neighbors. New York had some of the most eloquent voices for freedom and some of the chief financiers of slavery. And of course, in 1861, New York City contemplated seceding twice, once from the United States and once from New York State, so that it could be kind of a free agent to maintain its cozy relationship with the South. You could also say, did the Empire State have wealthy black residents? The answer is yes. In 1870, Frederick Douglass's family in Rochester owned about $42,000 worth of assets. That would make him a millionaire today. But that pales in comparison to wealthy white New Yorkers, people like John D. Rockefeller. In 1870, the black-white wealth divide halved nationwide, but wealth stratification continued in New York. The Civil War ended slavery, destroyed much of the South's wealth, but the decade of the 1860s saw anemic growth in the mid-Atlantic of less than 1% a year. And black New Yorkers faced those hard times. Slide, please. So how does this look? How does the afterlife of slavery, or put it another way, how does emancipation and Reconstruction look in New York State? Here's another example, and it's from Harriet Tubman. She settled in Auburn in Cuyahoga County, and she settled with many of those whom she liberated from enslavement in Maryland. And now Auburn was a center of abolitionist activism, and Tubman settled in a neighborhood of influential and wealthy business leaders, including lawyers and bankers. But in the midst of such affluence, she worked as a domestic servant. Now, this is before she went on to lead a lead a successful Sea Island strategy in the Combahee River raid in the Civil War. Reed Edifield's Black's Pulitzer Prize winning Combahee for more. And after emancipation in 1865, Tubman returned to New York. Now, during Reconstruction, a lack of resource and investment under slavery came back to disadvantage those people who were transplanted from the South. So many of those people whom Harriet Tubman liberated from Maryland could not read or write. And as Auburn joined the Industrial Revolution, that hampered their prospects. So Auburn was on a railroad route. It was near the Erie Canal. The D.M. Osborne and Company firm manufactured harvesting equipment, employed a sizable proportion of the city's workers. Auburn's woolen mills employed many more. There are many white immigrants from Western Europe who came to take those jobs. But African Americans had a difficult time getting factory work or joining unions. By 1870, there were dozens of Black Marylanders living in Auburn and many others who were born in South Carolina, but most of them were laborers and domestic servants. There were a few ministers, there were a few clerks. But the economy was working to decapitalize them by paying lower wages and restricting their opportunities. Next slide, please. So the per capita Black-white wealth income gap in the Mid-Atlantic was 47 cents on the dollar. So picture those Black workers in Auburn, right? They're working till Friday to earn the same pay at the same job as their white counterparts are earning by Wednesday at lunch. And so African Americans were just as productive as white workers. Black women were overrepresented in the workforce compared to white women, but racial differences benefited employers who pocketed a dividend on discounted Black paychecks. When it came to protecting Black earnings, insurance companies systematically reduced benefits to Black policyholders when they sold them at all. Lenders also discriminated against Black borrowers. African Americans were chronically underbanked. Think about the Freedmen's Bank, which for its first years was headquartered in New York City, failed in 1874, taking a large portion of African American wealth with it. Please read Justine Hill Edwards' brilliant new book, Savings and Trust, The Rise and Betrayal of the Freedmen's Bank. She tells this story. Next slide, please. So if you think about the next generation that followed Tubman's in Auburn, the Auburn Black community of refugees from the South faced a very hard climb socially and economically. In 1904, there were 458 African Americans in Auburn, but just one Black business, a barber shop, and 0 Black-owned corporations. Roughly 1 in 7 African American households owned their homes, and 1 in 9 were looking to buy. Daily wages among workers were low by the national average. There were just 6 Black high school graduates in 1904, so again, another generation removed from enslavement. And one of those Black high school graduates was Tubman's grandniece, Gladys Stewart Bryant. About 1 in 3 adult Black Auburn residents had life insurance, which was under the city average. So here was a city that was filled with abolitionists before the Civil War, but who did not support Black uplift afterwards. Harriet Tubman was unable to keep a home that she founded called the Home for the Aged. She was unable to keep it afloat or pay the property taxes, and it transferred to the Thompson Memorial African Methodist Episcopal Church, Zion, in 1903, a church that she was not a member of. It renamed and reopened the Harriet Tubman Home for the Elderly in 1908. She died there in 1913. The next slide, please. So by the time Tubman died, as Ms. Baker mentioned, Black Southerners were moving out of the South and moving to northern cities. Many arrived to learn that the career ladder in the North was artificially short for Black workers. Again, here is a story in which the Jim Crow South is kind of contrasted with New York, and New York comes out, seeming pretty good, but Black employers could not afford union wages, but union employers refused to hire Black workers. So refugees from Jim Crow came into that double bind. Real estate professionals, landlords, and lenders locked African American migrants into substandard housing in poor neighborhoods. Policymakers and employers joined in those housing joined those in the housing business to refashion Black disadvantage. So no matter their income, Black migrants could not find an address outside Black neighborhoods in which there were affordable kind of middle-class housing. Next slide, please. And we can see that the beginnings of redlining actually took place in cities like Syracuse and Auburn. They pioneered redlining during World War I, drawing maps, designating which neighborhoods were African American, and then drawing lines around those neighborhoods as if to lock out African American aspirants to good housing and wealth building. Next slide, please. This wasn't benign, right? Black New Yorkers from government finance, this excluded Black New Yorkers from government finance loans, first by the Federal Housing Administration, later by Fannie Mae and the Veterans Administration. Next slide, please. This is also from the University of Richmond's mapping inequality site that Ms. Baker also referenced. So this was the decapitalization of Black America. By systematically devaluing Black properties through lending discrimination, it created artificial scarcity, drove up rents for Black residents while pressuring Black occupants to divide their homes and double up, which strained resources, including municipal services and schools. Next slide, please. Now, here's the push and the pull. New York was also a place of progress. We think of people like Dora Lee Jones, who helped found the Domestic Workers Union. A. Philip Randolph helped found the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first successful Black-led union. He won recognition in 1937 and pressured the Roosevelt administration to ban discrimination in federal defense contracts during World War II. Next slide, please. But systematic discrimination against Black New Yorkers ramped up under the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, or GI Bill, which led to disparities in college access, home ownership, business loans, medical care, employment and job training. One study found that in 1993, roughly 50 years after the end of World War II, the average Black vet was $100,000 less wealthy than the average white vet. Next slide, please. So civil and political rights didn't readily translate into economic rights or economic justice. And this is why Dr. Martin Luther King and many others said, all right, the flip side of civil rights is opportunities, jobs, and freedom. Next slide, please. And as the housing market expanded after World War II, white New Yorkers built walls around wealth and attempted to exclude Black aspirants to the middle class. So this was the sequel to redlining in those new suburbs. And this blocked on-ramps to opportunity. And what you're seeing there is a deed that has specific racial exclusions written into it. Between 1944 and 1964, white Americans built and invested in suburbs where those advantages came bundled. Meanwhile, urban Black America sustained losses from redlined or divested real estate. And Black families often paid double the interest rate for home mortgages. If you didn't get federal loan insurance that might guarantee a rate of 4%, you had to pay 8% on the open market. So you got a kind of blanket of socialism for white middle class Americans and kind of a punishing free market for African Americans. And so, next slide, please. So this was the story of the Great Leveling, which took place from about World War II to 1973. And this was when incomes were more broadly shared, were higher than at any time before or since. And that came to an end in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Congress and the Carter administration deregulated railroads, airlines, banks, and trucking, which Carter proclaimed would end excessive and inflationary government restrictions and red tape. The Federal Reserve, headed by Paul Volcker and Alan Greenspan, put downward pressure on worker wages while tolerating inflated salaries up the income ladder. Now, what had been happening before 1980 was that because of the strivings of African Americans, the racial wealth gap was declining. It was about 3-to-1 on its way to equality by the first decade of the 22nd century. But instead of continuing to decline, after 1981, white wealth zoomed ahead of black wealth and Latino household wealth. Between 1983 and 89, average white household wealth rose by nearly a third. Black household wealth barely budged. So why was that? After Reagan took office, he championed policies designed to beat back inflation that also beat down Black America. In the interest of time, I won't go into detail on many of those, but one of the effects was to raise the costs on opportunity, raise the costs on higher education, to stop enforcing or limit the enforcement of federal civil rights legislation, to try and halt affirmative action in its tracks. And along with many liberals, they ramped up the war on drugs, which ballooned the prison population. So that by 2023, Black New Yorkers were 8.5 times more likely to be behind bars than white New Yorkers. So a conviction could destroy 2/3 of family wealth and limit a future income by as much as 90%. Those the policies that were enacted under the rubric of trickle-down economics never produced the advertised results. And in succeeding presidents, under succeeding presidents, George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, even more so under Reagan, white household wealth grew. White household wealth grew 77% between 1992, when Clinton was elected, and 2001, when George W. Bush took office. Under the same measure, black wealth grew by 20%. So how did this happen? We think of the portfolios of assets invested in the stock market as typically white wealth, and this white wealth ballooned as the markets went up. African American families had started to catch up in home ownership, but holding wealth in a home was less advantageous in the 1980s and 90s than it had been in the 1970s. When we think about as companies shifted from pensions to defined contributions, such as 401k accounts, black professionals, black participation lagged. Wealth was more difficult to build for African American families in a financialized economy. African American families had 3/5 of their assets in real estate in the 1980s and much less in stocks and other equities. And so, as you can see, again, this old pattern emerges. Once African American families and households build a little bit of wealth in housing, the market shifts, and it starts to strip those households of wealth. By the 2000s, between 35 and 40% of the racial wealth gap would be attributable to disparities between stock ownership and stock-related wealth and traditional assets, including business equity and home ownership. And we're seeing a rerun of this today, right? Everybody's worried about their portfolio. Everybody's watching the markets. The year America elected the first black president, Black America lost 48% of its wealth in the 2008 housing crisis. White America lost 26%, Latino Americans lost 44%, but white homeowners recovered much more quickly because they had a wealth cushion that typically included savings and stocks to fall back on. Black households did not have that family safety net and had been steered into high-risk, high-interest subprime loans, even when they qualified for prime loans. In 2013, President Obama declared, in quotes, "A dangerous and growing inequality and lack of upward mobility has jeopardized middle-class America's basic bargain that if you work hard, you have a chance to get ahead." Yet 30 years of supply-side economics have produced a policy environment in which there are few alternatives. Obama's signature policy achievement, the Affordable Care Act, improved Americans' health outcomes overall, but the black-white racial wealth gap widened during the Obama administration as the price tag on upward mobility steepened for black aspirants. And the health gap also stayed pretty wide, that the ACA helped everybody, but it did not close health disparities. As the pipeline from the classroom to the C-suite became sort of like a white pathway, rising tuition costs priced many low-income students out of the higher education market, increased educational debt, and compounded historical education deficits, particularly in Black and Latino families. By 2016, the average African-American adult aged 26 to 55 had nearly $44,000 in educational debt compared to $31,000 for whites. 39% of the same African American population had an educational debt compared to 30.5% for whites. So the intergenerational transfer of wealth that kind of boosted many white families up or prevented them from falling was just not there for African American families. So by the end of the first Trump administration in 2020, the white-black homeownership gap was larger than it had been in 1960. 72.1% of whites own their home compared to 43.4% of African American households, a 29% gap versus 26% in 1960, right? Which was before the Fair Housing Act, before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, before the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Next slide, please. So if we think about what the result of that is today, the racial wealth gap in New York City is yawning. In 2021, the typical black household in New York State had $18,870 compared to the typical white household of $276,900. 15 times the wealth of the median black household. That's nearly double the national average. That means that the typical black household has about 7 cents on the dollar, when the national average is about 15 to 16 cents. Next slide, please. We can visualize this looking at a series of maps. Here, this is a map of New York City. Those areas in red are white, predominantly white occupied areas. Next slide, please. And so if we look at these two slides, this is a social vulnerability index on the left and availability of banking on the right. We can see that those populations that are Black and Latino primarily are more socially vulnerable, that is, more vulnerable to fluctuations in heat. They have less internet, less broadband coverage, less banking. Next slide, please. And this is a deprivation index that also correlates to neighborhoods and enclaves of non-white New York City residents. Next slide, please. And so this is the internet connectivity. You can see it's more dense in places that white people, white New Yorkers live. So here it is. These are data from the 2020s, and this is 80 years removed from redlining. But yet, many of those same patterns regenerate and reemerge. Next slide, please. And so today, when we're thinking about the racial wealth gap, and look at how persistent it has been since the 1960s and how stubborn it has been, this is the distance between the will of policymakers and the realities and the accumulation of historical events. And what I argue in the book, The Plunder of Black America, is that it isn't a matter of past injustice impeding on present time. That is, in each new iteration of the US economy, new obstacles spring up in place of old ones. As soon as African Americans have overcome one obstacle to building income or earning income and building wealth, another one snaps into place. And so what we're seeing today, we've seen Ms. Baker mentioned AI. We see credit reports, credit reporting that influence employment, that decide whether you can rent a home, whether you can get a decent rate on a car or college or any kind of business loan. These are often determined by credit reporting scores that are automatically generated but fed with racist data. Now, President Biden and the Biden administration tried to change that through the American Rescue Plan and policies that try to undo hundreds of years of structural racism. Adjusted for inflation, Black Americans' earnings rose 2.2% under the first Trump administration and 6.2% under the Biden. And Biden's policies delivered on a lot of Trump's old promises. The nation built manufacturing infrastructure, expanded services, services like broadband, expanded tax credits, such as the child tax credit, to benefit many of the income groups that African Americans typically populate. But those are small policies that are now in full reverse. And so we are poised for a Reaganomics reboot, this time without even the veneer of concern for racial equality. And so one of the lessons from this history, I think, is that reparations are necessary. Reparations address the accumulation of harms, and not just the accumulation, but the new invention of an old pattern. So we ask ourselves, if the damage is financial, shouldn't the remedies be financial too? So thank you for your kind attention. And I'm sorry I had to rush through that a bit.
No, preach.
We are grateful to you, Dr. Skirmahorn. We thank you for taking the time to meet with us. We know you don't have time for questions, but we would love to invite you to come back because there's a lot to unpack what you provided, and we are grateful, and we know you have to run. But thank you for being here with us.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Hawkins. Thank you all.
Yeah. So we've had 2 excellent presentations full of information. So we will be reaching out to you again.
Thank you, Dr. Skirmahorn. So we are going to, again, we started late. We apologize for those that are just joining. We started late because there was an emergency here. There were fire trucks here, but thankfully there was no fire. It sounds like it was a malfunction or something, but we're glad that we can all be here with you today. We are the New York State Community Commission for Reparation Remedies, and this is our 6th public hearing. And we are certainly proud to be with you all today. We're going to go right into taking remarks from invited speakers. If they're invited speakers, it doesn't look like we have any today. And so we have a few people signed up, and so we'll go ahead and give them an opportunity. And before we provide that opportunity, I just want to remind you all of how we will plan to be as we prepare to take public testimony. And so we want to ensure that this forum provides everyone a safe opportunity to be heard, but it must be respectful, and we ask you to be action-oriented. This is where we listen to you, where you provide solutions, and we just heard from Dr. Skirmahorn, and he certainly had some solutions that we want to unpack, and we know he has to leave, but we want to hear solutions. And so here's an opportunity to provide your testimony. We ask all attendees and those that are providing testimony to share with us the ground, to abide by the ground rules. And so we're asking that we respect every voice. Every person here has the right to speak and to be heard. So we ask you to please listen actively and loud space for different perspectives. Center solutions, not just frustration. We know that this is an emotional conversation. There are feelings of anger, of grief, and urgency are certainly valid, but we want to channel those emotions into actionable solutions. We ask that there be no personal attacks or hate speech. Passion is welcome, but hostility is not welcome. We want to uplift and not tear down. Disrespectful language, threats, or personal attacks will not be tolerated. We want to honor your time and space, and so we want to make sure that all voices are heard. So be mindful of your time. There's a 3-minute timer. And so when you're speaking, honor the time. And if you're participating in the public hearing section, we ask you to limit your remarks to that designated time. And if you run out of time, remember that you can provide your written you can provide that testimony either written to the website at newyork.gov/reparations, or you can call in your public testimony at 518-473-3997. So there's an opportunity for you to continue. And I promise when you call the number, it's unlimited. You can leave a message as long as you like. And it's the same with your testimony. If there are 50 pages of written testimony that you have, it will certainly be attended to and reviewed. And so we want you to stay present and stay engaged. We want to hear, learn, grow, and take action. We want to commit to action beyond tonight, and that's certainly why we're here. And we want to thank you, most importantly, for being part of this conversation. Public comment is now open, and we have a few people signed up. So we want to make room for Kiana Biara. I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly. You can correct me when you come to the mic. Please give your name and your association. But Kiana Anderson, we welcome you and thank you for being here at Old Westbury. If you haven't had an opportunity to sign up, you can sign up at the front. And we thank you, Kiana, for being here.
Good evening. I think it's evening now. My name is Kiana Bieria Anderson. I am here representing a coalition, a Long Island-based coalition, the Coalition for Social and Economic Progress on Long Island. My name is Kiana Bieria Anderson, and I offer this testimony on behalf of the Coalition for Social and Economic Progress Long Island, known as CSEP-LI. Our coalition is a multiracial, cross-sector alliance committed to advancing racial equity and economic justice across Long Island through policy advocacy, community organizing, and research. Our mission is to advance social change, strengthen community well-being, and expand opportunity with priority of Black communities on Long Island through collaborative action, community-led research, and systems-level advocacy. Our vision is simple but powerful. A Long Island where Black communities thrive free from systemic barriers with equitable access to quality education, healthcare, housing, and economic opportunity. We see a region where justice, belonging, and shared prosperity are not the exception, but the rule. Today, we come before you with urgency and clarity. New York State must recognize and adopt reparations, not just as a symbolic gesture, but as a necessary remedy for centuries of harm inflicted on African Americans, particularly those whose ancestors were enslaved right here on Long Island. I'm going to skip ahead because some of these facts were read by Mr. Chris Sherman. I don't want to mess up his name. According to the Long Island Equity Study, home ownership opportunities for Black residents lag significantly behind those of other groups in the region, an issue exacerbated by unfair and unequal property tax assessment systems and consistent obstruction of equitable and green housing development projects. Rent is a financial burden for over 60% of Black Long Island residents. Black Americans are more likely to experience food insecurity on Long Island than their white counterparts and live in poverty pockets across the region. These designations contribute to education and healthcare systems that inadequately underserve Black residents. Long Island's changing demographics are an opportunity to explore new programs that uplift Black communities in areas like housing, job opportunities, and economic stability and vitality. The next generation of Long Islanders are reviewing this region and its consistent racism, both overt and covert, and deciding if this is an area that values them and sees their humanity. Reparations, as affirmed by scholars and economists alike, are not simply about dollars. They are about restoring stolen wealth, dignity, and opportunity. The Brookings Institute notes that the average Black family in America holds 1/10 the wealth of the average white family, a racial wealth gap that dates back to unpaid labor and codified exclusion. We offer the moral imperative. How can New York claim to be a progressive beacon while neglecting to reckon with its own role in America's original sin? We offer the economic argument. Closing the racial wealth gap could add $1 to $1.5 trillion to the U.S. economy by 2028. And specifically for Long Island, our region's economy could have been $25 billion stronger if racial income gaps had been eliminated, bringing nearly $22,000 more in average annual income for people of color on Long Island. Thank you.
Have not completed your testimony, you can still send it to our email at reparationscommission@reparationsny.gov. So thank you, Ms. Anderson. We're grateful that you came to be with us today. Yes, and if you want to give us a physical copy, you can give that to us as well. Next, we'd like to welcome Chantel Williams. Chantel Williams. When you come to the mic, please just introduce yourself, just in case I haven't pronounced your name correctly, and your association. So thank you for being here with us today. And then next will be David Rattray. If I pronounced your name incorrectly, I apologize. Welcome, Chantel.
Long Island wasn't just touched by slavery, it was built on it. In 1654, the first enslaved Africans arrived here on Long Island. And by the 1700s, Long Island had the largest enslaved population in the North. Their lives were marked by relentless violence, surveillance, and subjugation, all cemented into law. For instance, a 1682 slave code banned enslaved people from leaving the land of their enslavers without written permission. And the punishment for this crime? Brutal whippings. This wasn't just cruelty, it was a calculated strategy. Violent slave codes made it easier for white families to amass wealth through the forced labor of enslaved Africans, embedding subjugation into law, making it harder for them to resist. Slave owners took powerful positions as legislators, judges, and mayors, shaping the system to serve their interests and cementing their dominance. Richard Lloyd, for instance, one of Long Island's wealthiest slave owners, served as Suffolk County judge. He enforced the very laws that kept his wealth flowing and Black people in bondage. Abolition in 1827 didn't end that system. It adapted. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 gave former slave owners unchecked power to rip free Black people from their lives and return them to slavery, often without evidence. The criminal legal system wasn't about justice. It was about preserving a system of racial subjugation. The same logic carried into the 20th century. In 1994, Joseph Jackson, a Black man from Freeport, Long Island, was beaten by police into a confession for a murder that he could not have possibly committed. He lost 22 years of his life before exonerating evidence hidden by law enforcement finally surfaced. The system that denied justice under slavery and then during the post-emancipation era denied it again, because in our criminal legal system, Black lives remain expendable. Today, the legacy is still alive. Black Long Islanders are convicted of criminal offenses at a rate 8.3 times higher than their white residents in Suffolk County, 8.7 times in Nassau. For drug offenses, Black people are convicted at a rate of 20 times higher in Suffolk and 14.5 times higher in Nassau. Yet white people make up the overwhelming majority of those receiving substance use treatment, 65.3% compared to just the 11.7% for Black people. Instead of treatment, Black residents are jailed and often kept in sewage-flooded cells where they are denied basic medical care. This is not history, this is now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And if you didn't get an opportunity to complete your testimony, please feel free to share it. Next, we have David Rattray.
Hi, it's David Rattray from East Hampton. I'm here to represent the Plainsight Project, which is a research-based effort that began in 2017 simply to dive into local records and learn the names of the enslaved and free people of color who built East Hampton, Eastern Long Island, and, as we like to say, built America. And we have their names to prove it. I brought with me a sheet of 1,100 names of enslaved, free, and emancipated people of color that we've uncovered in our research in the past several years. And the key point that I want to make to the Commission is the ubiquity of enslavement on Long Island and in New York State. And basically, one way that I talk to school groups about it is that if you have a street named after you in any of our communities, odds are you were an enslaver, and that almost any family of means from the 1650s all the way through 1827 within the communities of East Hampton, Southold, Southampton, Shelter Island were all enslavers. And it is really the unusual family of means that was not someone involved in slavery one way or the other. And the other piece of this that we've discovered through our research is how strongly tied to international enslavement the east end of Long Island was, and the connections through trade to the sugar plantations of the West Indies, and how wealth was built on the backs of these people without any recompense. And consequently, we very strongly support financial reparations of some sort or another. But just to illustrate how blind I think white America is to the nature of our history, I was 2 years into this project. I grew up in East Hampton, 13th generation East Hampton. I was 2 years into the project before I thought to look up my own family history. And it took about 5 minutes, and I realized that in several branches of my family in East Hampton, I'm descended from enslavers. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And I realized that some sliver of the coins in my pocket tonight are derived from the labor of enslaved people whom my ancestors, quote unquote, owned. And I think it's only right that somehow they and their descendants be paid back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rattree. If you could share, if we could just take pictures, or if you're willing to share the 1,100 names that you have, we'd appreciate that. And then if you could share with Dr. McKinney the name of your group, we appreciate you being here. Thank you. We're going to, now I don't have any other names, and so now that we still have Ms. Baker on, we want to go back to the conversation for Ms. Baker, but before I take a break, I just want to see if there are any other names for public testimony. There are no other names, so Ms. Baker, are you still on the call? I did. Any audience members, did you get to sign up? If you want to sign up, please do so. Raise your hand. We want to make sure you have an opportunity. All right. So Ms. Baker, are you still there? If Ms. Baker's there, we would love to have her come back, and we would love her green slide back up, the slide that offered some opportunities for a path for reparations. If we could bring that slide back up, that would be great. Thank you. And if we could make, is it possible to flip the screen and have Ms. Baker be a full screen instead of the slide, and maybe the slide smaller and she's a full screen? Is she still with us? She looks frozen to us. No, okay. So Ms. Baker is no longer with us. We apologize, but we certainly would love to continue conversation with Dr. Skirmahorn and Ms. Baker. So we're going to take a 10-minute break and give the commission an opportunity to just gather. And then if you are here and you want to sign up, we'll have an opportunity to sign up. And if not, we'll prepare to close. And so thank you. We'll take a brief 10-minute break. Be here at SUNY Old Westbury. This is a beautiful campus. Admittedly, this is my first time here, and I'm so sorry it's the first, but it certainly won't be the last. Thank you to Dr. Sams and the faculty here for allowing us to be here on this beautiful campus. We hope that the next time we come back that you all will continue to spread the word about the great work that we are doing and that we could see more students be here and participate. Right now, public comment is, oh, I see Ms. Baker is back. We are so grateful that you were able to come back. We want to let you all know if there's anyone here that would like to provide some public testimony, we would open the floor for public testimony again, but we certainly want to open the floor for some questions with Ms. Baker. We are so glad that she was able to come back. And for Dr. Skirmahorn, we look forward to a full session with you. We certainly have more questions. We just talked quickly and said we want to learn more from Dr. Skirmahorn, and we have questions for him. And so we thank you, Ms. Bria Baker, for being here. She is the author of Rooted. had an incredible presentation earlier, and so now we have the commissioners have questions, and I'm sure there may be one or two questions in the audience. We want to make sure that we make time for the public hearing portion, but certainly want to make time for our commissioners to have questions. So thank you, Ms. Baker. We're going to go to Ms.
Oh, yes,
Baker
thank you.
and make opportunity for us to ask her questions. We wanted to talk about, you had on your screen solutions, you had land trust, you had various solutions for reparations, and wanted to know, we had questions about GBI for cities that have been engaged in GBI, and certainly Rochester has a GBI program. We know Atlanta just completed a GBI program. But my question to you is, have you seen a repository of some of these solutions like GBI that we can all just find one central place to say, okay, this is where this data shares that provides text that this GBI, so these GBI solutions will work, can work, and is a solution for reparations? Is there a place that we can go?
Yes, one of the best resources that I would say, there is a collective of mayors across the nation who are championing guaranteed income or universal basic income, which are, interchangeable terms. And that group is called Mayors for Guaranteed Income, or MGI. Dr. Daniels, I believe, mentioned a few of those mayors earlier, Michael Tubbs in California, a few over here on the East Coast as well. In Atlanta, the Grow Fund does some of that work as well. And so they have a really great resources hub of the research and the impact of these guaranteed income programs around the country and what they've been able to do, specifically those that have been piloted towards the Black community. I think they have to be careful to the point that was mentioned by one of the other commissioners as far as this anti-DEI age that we're in right now. And so I think it is rare for them to associate their research with reparations, but I think that you can look at the research, look at the target demographics that they've been working with and the communities they've been working in, and see the impact and make inferrals about the impact it could have if we were to expand it in the spirit of reparations. And that's what I would love to see it done as. I think there is, as I said earlier, a world where UBI and GI can happen and benefit all working class Americans, but I do want to see an emphasis on targeting Black Americans with these programs. And I think the research is really telling, because so much of the philanthropic dollars that circulate in this country are tied up in administration, which, I mean, is important. We're paying people salaries and keeping nonprofits afloat. But this shows that when you put money directly in the hands of families, that it changes their trajectories. It changes their children's outcomes, health, educational attainment, quality of housing, et cetera. And so I think we can use that data to make the case for reparations for sure. So again, that collective is called Mayors for a Guaranteed Income. Their website is mayorsforagi.org, and they have a resource hub with impact reports, which cities they've been doing it in, and you can see which mayors are a part of this collective, and many of those mayors are Black. So it's exciting to see the emphasis on Black mayors and their leadership in that movement.
Thank you. Other questions for Ms. Baker?
So you talked about the housing and the opportunity, the lack of opportunities the housing that was taken away from individuals. And so I have a question around housing. And so we know about redlining and how Black Americans were put in certain areas and their lack of resources. Do you know anything or any work around or any reparations type solutions around home repairs? And so we know that housing is a key piece to the American dream, if you say. And when I was commissioner of senior services in Erie County, just going through some of the neighborhoods, individuals were living in horrible conditions, but they couldn't afford to get their homes repaired. And so have you seen any programs that was targeted at that as far as a repair or remedy?
Yes, yes. And this is such a great point because I think this was what was used to target some Black families during the 60s and 70s was to say your home needs repairs. And so as a result, we're going to tear down your community as opposed to building it up and making those repairs. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, has offered previous programs for home improvement loans, but it has a limit because a lot of those loans do need to be paid back eventually. And I think in a reparations mindset, it would be really powerful to make those loans as grants that don't need to be paid back, especially to homeowners who are in good standing with their homes, who are paying their mortgage on time and consistently, being just making grants available to these community members for those home improvements. I think a lot of the programs that have been marketed as support for Black homeowners have in the end been predatory. And so I think we do need to acknowledge that. And I think that's why entities like this and with commissioners like you all, it helps because we will have these programs being designed by us for us, as opposed to having JP Morgan and Bank of America coming around and being like, I promise this is a good thing to do. And then it leading to housing collapses, which is what we saw that happened to a lot of Black homeowners after people were being incentivized into down payment programs. So I think number one, it's a matter of trust and rapport and making sure that the program is being steered by people that the community can trust and that there's a lot of transparency. And then making sure that we are giving out grants more than loans as much as possible because grants don't need to be paid back and don't push people into further debt. I think we need to make these investments the same way we should be investing in infrastructure like roads and lighting and public transportation, because ultimately the look and feel of a community leads to pride in a community and leads to people investing in public safety and making sure that these are safe communities for children, for example. And so we should see it as an investment as such. And I think we can funnel money from a variety of different areas, not just HUD, but also various different municipalities, public safety funds. And this is something that has also been done in other places, is making sure that, hey, our public safety budget doesn't need to go entirely to policing and prisons and jails. We can put some of those budgets into beautifying the community and making it a place that people are proud to say, hey, not on this block. We don't do that here. And we look out after one another because we are proud to be homeowners here. And that's the difference between a community of homeowners versus a community of renters who are being shuffled around and don't feel any sense of ownership over a space.
So last two questions from me, because hopefully there are other questions that may come from our audience here, or we'll go into our other comments. So two things. One, have you been in groups around discussion on properties or land like Wall Street or Central Park, like having discussions on what should happen with those properties?
That's a really, really good point. I think that some people are so afraid to touch these Manhattan sites because they feel like they're so entrenched. But again, Central Park was built on the backs of Black homeowners when it was Seneca Village. And so I think if eminent domain could be used to take private property from Black property owners for the purpose of public, which is what it's supposed to be, a public interest, we should be using eminent domain to seize private property or public properties like a Wall Street or a Central Park for the purpose of greater public interest. Central Park is beautiful and we do need green spaces, but it's a massive green space in a city that is really struggling with affordable housing. And I do think that there can be a case for making some of that space available again to Black property owners and homeowners who are being gentrified out of their communities in other parts of the city. With Wall Street, I think the challenge is that so much of that is privately owned by corporations. But again, eminent domain is a very legal way to seize private property. And I think we need to constantly ask ourselves why eminent domain can be used to take Black private property and never white private property. And I think maybe it will actually do a good service towards raising awareness to the dangers of eminent domain if we started encouraging for using eminent domain to seize greed and hoarding. During the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, there was so much vacant property in the city because we realized that a lot of those were investment properties or second and third homes for the wealthy. People were were crammed into small spaces, living on top of one another, and we had to push the homeless into hotels as large penthouses and condominiums remained vacant. And I think we really need to ask ourselves, do we want to be a city of second and third homes, or do we want to be a city of homeowners, people who actually live here, work here, play here, and pay taxes here? And so I would love to see us making some bold sweeps and saying there's a lot of property in Manhattan, is that especially the office spaces that are not being used the way that they can be. A lot of those buildings can be converted into housing that is actually affordable, not affordable for the top 10%, but affordable for us. And looking at what that changes. We don't need, this might be controversial, but we don't need congestion pricing to make that shift. I think we can reappropriate some of this property, including some of the elite property in Manhattan, for the use of those of us who are being pushed to the outskirts. So I have not seen many big proposals being put forward for those spaces, but I am a part of a few groups, one being BLISS, which was mentioned earlier in my introduction, which stands for Black Liberation Indigenous Sovereignty. This is a group of Black and Native American, predominantly New Yorkers, but it's starting to branch out and include people from around the country who are thinking about more innovative approaches to both reparations and land back. And I think that, New York, the claim that is made is that there's not enough space to go around, particularly when we're talking about the five boroughs, and there is. It just is not enough space if we're not considering neighborhoods that are being controlled by the white and wealthy. So
So
I
last
definitely
question,
would love
because
to do
I
that.
know my commissioner to my right is ready to jump in. So last question I have, what are your thoughts, or have you been in conversation about banks and businesses that have benefited from slavery, participating or providing monies and land and that
Yes.
type stuff? As
100% yes. When I think of reparations, I think anyone who benefited and profited from enslavement and the expansion and vestiges of it, should be held accountable. That includes the federal government, that includes local governments, that includes private citizens and the businesses that they operated. Some of the most notorious industries that benefited from slavery are insurance companies, banks, and railroads. A lot of those companies still exist today. They have other land holdings and trusts and endowments. Private universities too. Columbia University is one of the largest landowners in the city of New York, does not pay property taxes because of its status as a higher education institution, but has been very complicit in pushing out Black New Yorkers from their communities in uptown Manhattan, to make space for their campuses. This is a university with a multi-billion-dollar endowment, and I can say that because I'm a Yale University grad, and we have the same relationship to the community of Connecticut as far as elite universities go. Yale University has a $44 billion endowment, does not pay property taxes, but leeches off of what property of tax payers are and property owners are paying in the state of Connecticut. So I think we need to be looking at universities as well, especially universities that benefited from land grants, which is its own conversation. But there is research about that. There are maps that show which universities received land from the federal government as Indigenous people were being pushed out, and as Black people were working that land. Black people were clearing that land, Black people were building the buildings, Black people were forced into servitude inside of those buildings as domestic workers. And so Black and Native people should get some sort of restitution for what happened on their back. So I absolutely believe we need to be looking at private and public institutions, because sometimes it's not just the for-profits, it's also the quote unquote nonprofits, and those elite universities that are not sharing the wealth that they've been able to hoard over the last several centuries. I know Yale University is older than the United States, and was founded before the Declaration of Independence was signed. I don't remember off the top of my head the history of Columbia University, but I'm sure it was not far behind Yale. And so I think that all of these institutions need to be asking, what were you doing prior to the abolition of slavery? And if the answer was getting any bit wealthier, you likely benefited from the work and labor of enslaved Black people, and there should be some compensation. But definitely the banks, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and many of the other banks, many of whom have headquarters in New York City, did benefit from the slave trade. And those companies that are not in existence today, they have those holdings have transferred. So if the company is not in operation right now, the money is still in circulation. Someone got their investment out of that company before it went under. They turned that investment into a new company, and that new company would not have been made possible without the deposits made by our ancestors. And so I think all of that needs to be put under a magnifying glass, and people need to be held accountable. And I know a lot of universities, including Harvard and Yale, have been doing, these $100 million studies into their roles in slavery. And we need to be forcing these companies to pay for that research themselves as well, because the burden of proof should not fall on us. We know that the money didn't come out of thin air. These $1 trillion companies don't become rich in 10 years. They become rich over centuries, and they absolutely need to be paying their just due. Yes.
Thank you, and I look forward to talking and learning more from you and having the conversation. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate your innovative thinking here.
I'll make this really, really brief. Again, thank you so much for making yourself continually available. This was a question I also had for the previous presenter, Dr. Shimmerhorn. We have seen one example at the very least of some fraction of a fraction of a fraction of members of our community getting access to what might possibly be classified as a version of reparations in the immediacy following the Civil War. And yet, when there was a change in administration, a change in federal policy, that reparation, that reparative offering was then snatched back. I'm curious if you have any access to conversation or insight into not just the securing of reparations, but the protecting of it and the preventing of it from being removed with the shift in political winds, with the shift in who is in what office. The getting of it is one thing. It's the keeping of it that keeps me up at night, because I have not yet seen a whole lot of discussion about how that happens.
Oh, this is such a great question, and one that I would love to continue talking with you all about. It's a big one. I think one of the biggest versions of the snatching back is not one that happens with the government taking back its benefits, but with the government standing by as white citizens and vigilantes take back that wealth and those resources. We talk about a Tulsa and a Wilmington, North Carolina as these Black Wall Streets, as they were dubbed by Booker T. Washington, where Black people were able to amass great wealth, build businesses, build great communities, and then be burned to the ground as the National Guard was called in and complicit and part of that. In Tulsa right now, there are museums that honor what happened in the massacre, even as people and descendants who are over the age of 100 tell their story in and out of courtrooms and don't receive restitution. So I think this definitely needs to be discussed. I don't know exactly what these protections look like, because ultimately what we're talking about here is who law enforcement protects and whether law enforcement sees the Black community and the property and wealth of the Black community as worth protecting against white citizens, especially when those white citizens are wealthy and powerful. But it definitely is a conversation that needs to happen, because ultimately we can make gains right now, as happened during the Obama administration, that get pulled out. I mean, even under the Biden administration, for example, there were some really powerful settlements that were made in the name of environmental justice, where Black communities that had been victim to environmental injustice, such as poisoned water, petrochemical plants poisoning the air, et cetera, and had received multi-million-dollar settlements to fix those water systems, to clean that air, to undo it. Trump has already overturned some of those settlements in the name of his anti-DEI mission. And so it's definitely something that we need to be really mindful of. I think I'm really curious about what, the powers of executive order and what is not in the jurisdiction of an executive order, what would need to go through the courts to be undone, and making sure that there is extra protection. I think one of the best ways, but it's also one of the slowest ways, is things codified by Congress are a lot harder to overturn without going through the Supreme Court to do. I mean, it's still possible, and we do have a conservative Supreme Court that doesn't look to be siding with Black Americans in the conversation of reparations, but it's still a more laborious process than a president just signing 20 executive orders each day. But it's definitely something to think about, because ultimately, we don't exist in a world where we have an equal right to the Second Amendment and to protecting ourselves in that way. And so I do fear for what it means to give land and wealth to Black people and surrender them to the violence and the white lashing that comes after that. And I think that thinking of how we protect those assets is really, really important. I think it's also why I'm in favor of proposals like baby bonds and things like that, that appreciate with time, but that Black children would cash out at, once they're coming of age and turning into their 20s, as opposed to an asset that can be more easily stolen. But even still, I mean, we see Social Security being attacked. And so who's to say that baby bonds wouldn't be as well? So I don't have a clear and cut answer. I just want to validate that what you're bringing up is a really important concern for us to be considering, is not just how we get the reparations, but how we keep it. I think the Bruce's Beach example is another example of it. They got the eminent domain reversal, all to have to turn around and sell it right back to the same people who stole it from their parents because they couldn't afford the taxes. So I think we need to think of every possible loophole that will be used by the opposition to undo this work and have protections on protections on protections, to account for that. And I think it will take really sitting in a room and really thinking of, have you thought of this? Oh, I didn't think of this. Okay, let's really reimagine what we can do to protect the assets that we're trying to fight for.
Would it, just as a brief follow-up in light of your final comment, would it be advisable in your perspective for us to, as much as we are learning about what reparations might look like, would it be advisable in your perspective for us to also hear testimony on what previous efforts to utterly vanquish or obliterate Black wealth also look like, so that that planning could happen with some informed understanding as to what has happened in the past? Marcus Garvey has this quote, "What Africans have done, Africans can do." But that is it's a universal truism, and it means that what others have done can also be done again. And so would it be advisable from your seat of expertise for us to also take in guidance and insight as to what those previous efforts to destroy Black wealth, how that has shown up? Because it wasn't just violence, it was a combination of both violence, governmental actions, policies, and so on, and the abdication of duty to an equitable administration of justice. Do you think that that's something that we should also lend our ears to?
1000%. We absolutely have to be students of history, because I think the phrase that's getting used all the time and overused, in my opinion, is this idea that we're in unprecedented times. These times are dangerous, but they are not unprecedented. We have been through similar times before. Our ancestors have been through similar times before. And it's only when we are not students of history that we don't realize that a similar blueprint is being used. I mean, even now when we see white supremacists crowdfunding online for their defenses, that is something that was happening during the Jim Crow South and KKK and even the post-Reconstruction era. And there is archival research that shows that this is not, I mean, they were using different technology to do so, but it was happening. Same thing with the violence and the white lashing. What we're seeing, this white domestic terrorism, is not new. And so we need to be prepared for it. And I think when we are students of history, then we can kind of anticipate what they're going to do. Because what happened after the Obama administration, we should have been prepared for. That they were not going to allow a Black man to sit in office for 8 years and that to go unchecked and without some sort of response from their side. And I think we were so excited at the symbolism and what it meant, thinking that we were in a post-racial America, not all of us, but some of us, that we fell asleep at the wheel. And we have to be really vigilant at all times. So I absolutely think that's possible. And to the point of being students of history, I think that's why we also need to look to successful versions of reparations elsewhere to see how it has been codified and maintained over time. I mean, in Germany, I'm not going to say that they're doing everything perfect, but the work of repair after the Holocaust has been so successful that you can't even, a swastika, a Heil Hitler symbol is not even allowed to be reprinted in digital publications on social media. It's getting removed immediately. I mean, we allow symbols of anti-Black hatred to be regurgitated over and over and over, on social media and in our channels and through elected officials or those appointed by elected officials like Elon Musk. And so I think that we need to to watch and see how others are doing it. And not to say that anyone has done it perfectly, but there are examples of reparations, and I think that's something that, again, to credit our brothers and sisters in California, they're doing really well, looking at what reparations for Japanese internment has looked like. And there are so many Japanese Americans who are standing with Black Americans for reparations and saying there was a version of it that was done for us, there can be a version of it that is done for them, and it can be more expansive. And we need to just look at what these models have looked like elsewhere. And a big part of it is public education. We cannot allow white lies to fester and think that we're not going to deal with that white lashing eventually. We need to be really proactive about making sure people understand why we have reparations, that this is not a handout, that this is actually a payback. And if Black people were asking for the full amount plus interest, it would bankrupt this nation. People should be lucky that we are accepting it on discount. And that's what most of the proposals brought forward are discounted versions of what true reparations would look like. And I think the more that we do the publication, the more that we root out incentives for the hate. But absolutely, we need to be students of history. And that Marcus Garvey quote is so spot on.
Ashe, and thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Daniels, do you have questions?
I really appreciate this conversation, but like I said, I got some constraints because I have some dental issues, so I'm not as conversant as I'd like to be, and it's also cold in here, and I hate to be
Take your time,
shivering
Dr. Daniels.
and whatever, but there are a few things that I'd like to share. One, in terms of let me go back to the issue that you raised, Commissioner Hogue, about home improvement and so forth, or the examples. Yeah, Evanston is an example.
Yes.
Robin Rue Simmons is on our list, so she can come and testify that. So in Evanston, the first awards were made on the basis of housing. That was what the people came up with in terms of the public hearings and discussions. And so the awards are not big, but because they're not big, does not mean they're not reparations.
Right.
Because at some point you have to have a financial stream some way. And in Evanston, of course, a percentage of the tax on legalized marijuana was used as a basis. Now they've also gone beyond that to add more to it. They're up to about 15 million now. Beginning with 1 million, they're up to about 15 million. But the first project was to provide vouchers, and now they're also making cash payments, so people could in fact do that. They could do home improvements, because that will increase the wealth of the property. So there is a concrete example of that being done, which is why Evanston is so incredibly important. In fact, I'm hoping that when this December comes up, there's an annual symposium that maybe some of our commissioners will be able to go out and interchange and meet with other commissioners in that regard. So that's number one. Secondly, on the issue of corporations, I may have mentioned this at the last hearing, but if I did not, because I can't always remember where I'm at in terms of these meetings. But Cam Howard is also on our list. Cam Howard is with Reparations United. He's a former male co-chair for in COBRA. He's also a NARC commissioner. And one of the things that he has put forth is something called a slavery disclosure and redress legislation. So what that means is, and they started in Chicago with the city council, and it needs to be tweaked, but the idea is to investigate which companies actually had some relationship with enslavement. And to say, if you did so, therefore you have to make compensation. But it was voluntary, so it can also be made. Now what has happened in the state of Illinois, the legislature has actually introduced in the state of Illinois a slavery disclosure and redress ordinance. And I'm only saying that because it may well be that one of the recommendations may be that this could happen in the state of New York as well. Because what that means is then if you want to do business with the state, and we know that a lot of Elon Musk is showing us, right? A lot of people do business with states and governments. then the precondition is then you must disclose and you must compensate or you're not allowed to do business with the state. So that's an enforceable, that has teeth to it in a way that could be very, very helpful. The other point I want to just drop on people is, and this is again mentioned in the NARC 10-point program, and you can go to, I think it's reparationscom.org, and you can see the 10-point program. And Evanston is another illustration of this. We advocate that whenever there are reparations going to be in the mix, that we find a way to have a way in which black people actually control the resources.
Yes.
Because if we control the resources, then you can't take the resources back. Now, one of the problems with that is, and this is the important thing that I think we also have to learn, really, and these things are interconnected. Now, nothing happens in isolation. Elections have consequences because it determines what's legal and what's not legal. So in another era, some of the things that would now be challenged in terms of what we're doing would not have been challenged, because the legal jurisprudence would talk about things like disparate impact, and discriminatory effect, and concepts like that that are now alien, are now being. So really, diversity, equity, and inclusion was really a way of trying to get back at affirmative action. To be, if you want to know the truth about diversity, equity, it was like a way of how do we still get some things done in that regard. So we advocate this idea of having a reparations finance authority, and in Evanston they have one. So they not only have the dispensation of reparations, but they have set up an independent reparations finance authority which is connected to the Evanston Community Foundation. Now what this means is not only can they receive public funds, but they can also receive funds from corporations, universities, and so forth. So that's a model that we can also look at. The last 2 or 3 points I want to make quickly are, I think, are teased out of the previous couple of the last testimony, and because I think the educational component becomes very, very important. I have learned a tremendous amount from just listening to the information. I mean, learning more and more in specificity. But I think it's important to just point out certain things, and I really appreciate that speaker who came forward to talk about having found out that his family is a slaveholding family. I maybe have uplifted it again, but I'll do it again. There is a book, there is a documentary called Traces of the Trade by Trina Brown. And Trina Brown is somebody who's from New England, and her family was engaged in the triangular trade and made a huge fortune in so doing. And they have come forward to testify about that. And that becomes important because while we want to educate black people and make sure that we learn, we also want to make sure that if more white Americans or Euro-Americans knew more, they would perhaps do better. And so more and more people are coming across in that regard. And I close on this note, a very critical note, because affirmative action is always, get lambasted, affirmative action, affirmative action. So what our previous speaker talked about, to the degree that in the Jim Crow South, there were certain jobs that black people could not work in or were excluded from. When there were labor shortages, they said, well, we'll let you work, but you will have to work for less wages. First of all, to set those jobs aside is affirmative action. Let me say that again. That is affirmative action. That was affirmative action for white people, because these jobs were set aside. Only certain jobs that Europeans, that white people could work. Not only did that happen down south, we now hear it also happened up south. So this idea that affirmative action is some crazy concept, no, white people benefited from affirmative action for them to the degree that we were excluded from certain jobs. The last thing is he talked about cross-generational wealth. That is an incredibly important concept that needs to be sharpened. I think it's Richard Americus, maybe the author. The notion is what's called cross-generational benefits and cross-generational deficits. So for those people, those immigrants that he talked about who came across. He talked about the fact that, well, the black people couldn't work in certain of those jobs. Well, very often those were the better paying jobs. So what does that mean? That means that to the next generation, they could pass, it was a benefit. They could pass on the accumulated wealth, the accumulated benefits. But for black people, it was a deficit. It was a cross-generational deficit. So again, those are very important concepts that I just want to share just in terms of, because I often lecture on these points, quite frankly, and I enjoy doing it around this whole area of affirmative action because a lot of people don't grasp it. That we're not, as you said before, this is not nothing special. We're not asking for no handout. These are concrete ways in which people have benefited. And even if more white people understood this, more white people perhaps would understand. Because the question is, well, how come they're still asking these questions? How come they're still behind? Well, you were able to benefit from a benefit while we were, in fact, held back through a deficit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Daniels. And if you want to learn more about when affirmative action was white, you can read a book by Ira Katz Nelson. That is the title. Certainly an opportunity to learn more. As we prepare to close, we have 11 minutes left. We want to make room for Laura Harding, Esquire, who has we are extending time for you for a public testimony. So thank you, Laura Harding, for being here today.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Laura Harding. I'm a social and racial justice advocate, a member of the New Yorkers for Reparations Coalition, a member of the Coalition for Social and Economic Progress on Long Island, and the Black Voters of Long Island. I'm pleased to welcome the Commission and the Commissioners to Long Island, especially because our Assembly member, Michael Solage, was a co-sponsor of the bill that established the Commission. I'd also like to formally recognize the Native Americans who were custodians of this land. Here in terms of a land acknowledgement. Long Island has historical significance as the location where the first enslaved Africans in Suffolk County were brought by Nathaniel Sylvester to Sylvester Manor from Barbados in 1654. Long Island is reputed to have had the largest population of enslaved people in the northern colonies, and notably New York has enslaved more Africans or did enslave more Africans than all of the New England colonies combined. The history of enslavement on Long Island is largely concealed and might be forgotten if not for the modern day impact of slavery's legacy and the ongoing institutional and systemic racism that results in disparities in housing, education, and health, along with voting and environmental injustice for Black residents on Long Island. This is why New York State must study, recognize, and implement reparations for all Black people who have been historically and currently harmed by enslavement and its subsequent vestiges. The United Nations defines reparations as a range of measures designed to redress human rights violations, offering both material and symbolic benefits to victims and their communities. Accordingly, the Commission should adopt this definition to create a foundation for reparations to address the harm. Specifically, as a Black person on Long Island, the 10th most segregated region in the nation, access to fair, affordable, and inclusive housing is likely limited due to the impact of segregation, redlining, and urban renewal policies. You're likely to disproportionately be exposed to environmental hazards, and your access to healthcare is hindered and negatively impacting your mortality and life expectancy. As a result, New York State reparations are necessary and must take the form of policies that include investments in education, healthcare, and housing and policy reforms aimed at dismantling the structural systems. More importantly, we need to look at recalibrating the foundation aid formula in terms of to make it more equitable for funding of schools. We need to actually affirmatively go after voting rights violations and laws. The John Lewis Act isn't enough. And we also need to look at the zoning laws that currently impact housing and also Black people and Black communities being placed in, being zoned in environmentally dangerous places as some of the issues. So we need policies, we need compensation, we also need curriculum, and we need this embedded. And what we're talking about is not just a financial shift, but also a cultural shift that requires equity to be embedded in the same way that white supremacy has been embedded in New York State. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Harding. Yep, thank you, Ms. Harding. We are grateful to you. If you missed anything, please email us. And I'd love for you to share more about what is missing from the John Lewis Voting Act. I certainly would love to hear more. We still have Bria Baker on. Just wanted to thank you for staying with us and extending your time. We are grateful to you. Thank you for this opportunity. We want to thank all of the interpreters. We are grateful to the interpreters for being here. Thank you to our stenographer. We appreciate you and we thank you for being here today. Thank you for everyone for coming and being with us at SUNY Old Westbury. We are grateful to you and we're grateful to the faculty. Dr. Sams, thank you for having us here. Ms. Baker, you stayed on with us. We want to give you an opportunity for any last words before we have about 6 minutes left. Our timer is going. So I wanted to give you an opportunity for any last words if you had any. And if not, we will continue on. I want to remind you all that you can learn more about the commission. You can watch previous meetings at ny.gov/reparations. If you have testimony, pictures, any artifacts that you'd like to share, you can send them to the commission at reparationscommission@reparations.newyork. So that's ny.gov. Or if you just need an old-fashioned phone call and you have a lot to say and you didn't get an opportunity, you can call us at 518-473-3997. We want to thank you for being here. I want to thank my fellow commissioners for being with me today and joining. This was, for me, it was great learning. I know Dr. Daniels said he learned a lot, and certainly it was a great opportunity. Even though we were cold, it was good. It was well worth it. And now we're going to find some soup from somewhere and try to warm up. But thank you. I want you all to give yourselves a round of applause for being here. And I want to thank our staff. I want to thank our staff for their leadership and making sure that this was a great opportunity for us, and thank the committee that put together the recommendations for the education session. Well done. This was a great learning today, so well done. It's the two committee members right here, Loree Daniel Favors and Dr. Daniels, and also our vice chair, Dr. Jenkins. Thank you. And for everyone watching, thank you for being with us. We will be in Harlem next month. And we will be in Brooklyn, my hometown, in July. So I'm looking forward to that. So I look forward to seeing you all and more people joining us. And stay tuned. Learn more about our commission at ny.gov/reparations. Thank you all, Westbury, for having us today. This was incredible. Thank you.